Hey everybody, welcome to the beginning of the last week, I guess sort of distance learning. We're on Wednesday already, May 27th, because remember last week we had that whole week-long packet. And we are getting into our final 3 days of content. So just a little overview of what's going on here this week. We're going to have today is going to be a little bit of notes. We're going to do it about the urbanization of America, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. And then tomorrow, we're going to do a little bit of a review because Friday, you are going to have a quiz that will be the last thing that's going to be taken for any sort of participation grade in distance learning. Now, this will be covered frequently throughout the week, but I do want you to have this etched into your brains as much as possible. The last day that I'm going to accept late work is going to be June 1st, which is Monday, and that's going to be the day before conferences start. Couple reasons for that, but obviously considering that we're doing conferences, if I can have myself a good, decent amount of time to get everything caught up, I can give your parents an accurate description of how you're doing. And also that'll probably give you enough time to get things done. If you are a little bit behind, you'll have the whole weekend to catch up. So I feel like it's a good happy medium. Okay. So let's get into urbanization for today. It's going to be notes. So you can go into your note packet that was given. It's going to be right in the front. Now, warm up today. That's not your warm up. May 27th, according to your book, the United States would go from a nation of mainly farmers in the 1850s to arguably the most industrialized nation on the planet by 1900. Which of the following reasons do you think is most responsible for this? There are multiple choices that you can pick from. Pick one, and that'll count as your warm-up grade for today. All right, we'll get into this because there are a few slides on here today, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. Really quickly here, let's take a look at that exit ticket. After families relocated to the city, what happened to the size of the average family compared to those in the country? Definitely something that we'll talk about in here, but also something that you can look up in your slides as we'll go through. Okay. So urbanization and the American city. Now, for urbanization, what that means is it's the growth of cities. Now, we live in an interesting area, and depending on where you live, you might live in an urban area. If you live in downtown Minneapolis, or if you live in downtown St. Paul, you technically live in an urban area. It is a large city. Now, as you can see, this is a light map taken by a satellite in the United States. Now, obviously, the borders are drawn in, as are the major highways, but these spots that you see represent these urban areas better than I could ever describe them, right? Here's our urban area. Here's the Twin Cities. You have Toronto over here, Milwaukee, Chicago, Dallas-Fort Worth, which are the southern Twin Cities. Maybe some of you have heard of that before. You got Austin here. San Antonio is a little bit farther south. And then you have LA, San Francisco. We could go on forever, right? Now, these are interesting ones. This is actually the capital city of Canada up here. It's called Ottawa. A lot of people don't know that. You have Montreal and then Quebec City up here. Now, like I said, we could do that all day, but it's a really good way to describe through the lights. Sorry about that. Apparently my dog's upset about something. What else is new? All right, we're going to talk about the urbanization or the growth or the cityization and what it did to America. Okay, so there are really three factors that are going to be responsible for the growth of cities. Number one, improved transportation. We talked about railways, and between cities, it was great for hauling freight and goods and passengers, but we're going to see smaller scale trains inside of cities that are going to be able to transport people really quickly. These are like your trolley cars, or for a great present day example, the light rail, right? And industrialization, right? In order to get people to move, the one thing that you need to have is a job for them to do to make money, right? So these cities are going to start having factories pop up, mainly because they're able to construct them in these large cities with steam engines powered by coal. And then lastly, the production of these goods is going to start getting them to be sold, which is going to create more jobs, but is also going to get people into the city because it's easier to buy goods there. All right, so the nation's 3 largest cities by 1850. All right, New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. Now, I can tell you, obviously, New York is still #1, right? It's not even a close second, really. But other than that, these other 2 are well down the list. In fact, I can't say for certain, but I would argue that Baltimore is probably not even in the top 20 biggest cities in the United States anymore. And as we start to get these transportation routes expanding west, especially with people like Cornelius Vanderbilt that are opening up Chicago to rail travel from New York and other large cities, these farther ones west in the Midwest are really going to start to emerge. All right, and we've talked about this in depth already, right? Look at this. This is in 1850. This is the rail network, and this is 1860. Now, this is Vanderbilt's line right here, if you're ever curious as to where it went from New York to Chicago. But the thing that really interests me is the idea that look at how disjointed these rail networks are, right? It's really difficult for any of these cities to grow at a quick rate when they don't really have any consistent transportation. Now, a lot of these cities that you see here, they are going to share a port on a Great Lake or on the Atlantic Ocean. But that's not very consistent, right? You're going to get shipments very infrequently that way. It's when we start to see these rail connections that these cities really start to develop quickly. Now, immigrants are going to be the large part of the labor force that's going to be coming into the United States. And this is something that was encouraged, right? Because the United States started to industrialize and get so many jobs and expand literally because of people moving out west to the point that we needed labor to come in so that we could either replace the people that were moving or just simply get the people in these jobs that were needed as these factories and jobs were being created. Okay, so you're going to see the Irish are going to be escaping the potato famine. We've talked about that already, right? Interestingly enough, that was a crop that was taken from the Americas, brought to Ireland, became their main crop, and then had a huge, huge, horrible disease sweep through, and that pushed them out. Germans are going to be escaping revolution and unrest. That's something that goes on in Germany for a long time because technically at this point there is no Germany. It's a whole bunch of German-speaking states that are always fighting one another. And then Scandinavians are drawn by the opportunity to own land because in a lot of northern Scandinavian countries, there are going to be people that are going to be considered peasants that don't have the ability to own land, just like in the feudal system. They were a little bit behind at that point, and people wanted to have the opportunity. In America, because of the sheer land they had, they wanted to do whatever they could to get people over there. All right. This is a ship docking with immigrants at New York. I think, honestly, whoever painted this wanted to make it look a little bit cleaner than it probably was. The conditions on these ships were usually none too good, especially considering that these were people that were escaping a country. They probably were not really wanted to leave. All right, so immigration is going to help the U.S. population double from 1790 to 1820. But then after that, it's really going to take off. You're going to start seeing Germans, Irish, British people, and Scandinavian people come over. There's some early success because of the demand for people. So they're going to start writing, talking about the jobs, land opportunities, and that's going to get more people to come because, well, I mean, if they hear that things are good and the situation is still bad in their home country, people are going to be willing to make that move to try to make life better for their families. Now, there is going to be a class difference in cities, right? Just like we talked about in Europe, just because we're starting to industrialize and the old class distinctions are going away, that doesn't mean that there isn't a huge wealth gap, okay? The unskilled and uneducated, they're going to live in what we call slums, which is going to be very, very packed together, like you see in this picture here, and they're going to be close to their place of employment. There's no such thing as personal transportation, right? So especially if you couldn't afford to ride on these rail cars that were made, you needed to live within walking distance of where you worked. Usually skilled workers, these are going to be people that own their own businesses. Let's say like a butcher or a blacksmith. They're going to live above their store. So it's going to be like a 2-story building. You still see a lot of these buildings in cities today where people will have like I know there was a guy in my college town who he owned a barber shop and he lived just on the floor above it. That still happens a decent amount. Educated middle class, they're going to live in comfortable homes. And they're going to be a little bit outside the middle of the city. And then the wealthy are going to live in mansions, and it's going to be way far away from everyone because, number one, they want to have as much room as they can to spread out. And number two, they want to avoid the high crime areas. So this would be a slum by railroad tracks. Now, it doesn't look like what we would consider to be like a really large urban area now. And that's because skyscrapers and really tall buildings weren't able to be built yet. But you have a very large amount of older rundown homes by the railroad tracks so that if they need to, they can take the transportation they need to get to work. City sanitation was really bad, okay? Garbage collection was not a city service, okay? You could pay somebody to take your garbage, but to pay for that when your factory wages were as low as they were was pretty rare. A lot of times you're throwing things out in the street or you're throwing them out in the woods. Okay, there really wasn't a way to get rid of it. You had to pay to get a sewer hookup. So in a lot of cases, and this was until the early 1900s, a lot of cities would have it looked like a ditch that ran through the middle of it, and it smelled terrible because in a lot of cases that was raw human sewage or horse sewage or, quite frankly, just water and liquids that you don't want to have in the middle of your town, okay? Now, eventually, this is going to cause people that can pay, wealthier people, to relocate because they don't want to deal with that. And also, we're going to see police force. They're going to be shown up, and they're usually going to be paid by wealthier people to protect them because the crime in some of these areas started to get out of control. Usually people lived in ethnic neighborhoods. Now, what do we mean by ethnic? Ethnicity means country origin, right? And this isn't because of, at least in the beginning, it doesn't really have anything to do with negative racial attitudes or negative attitudes towards other people from different countries. What it really is that a lot of people that came to the United States, they didn't know how to speak English. So in order to communicate, you're going to relocate to neighborhoods where you speak the language, right? And this definitely happens with the Irish, but it happens with the Germans, Scandinavians. In fact, there are lots of towns today that have come into existence that are still considered very heavily one ethnicity of a town. For example, a hometown of one of the staff members that works with us, she is from Pulaski, Wisconsin, which is really close to my hometown. And that is a very, very strong Polish community because a lot of people came to relocate to become dairy farmers, and the Polish people all settled in that one city. And it happens all over the place. There's going to be the church because that's going to help bring people together. And then eventually, because they can't trust that other people are going to be helping them out and they can't pay for it, a lot of times they are going to create their own volunteer fire departments and militia, which just means volunteer fighting forces. And in some cases, they'll serve as policemen as well. All right, this is the 5 points. There's a really good movie of this called The Gangs of New York with Leonardo DiCaprio that came out. It was a long time ago. But it shows where 5 ethnic neighborhoods all come together. And as you can see, it's kind of a hodgepodge. This was a place where lots of gang wars were fought between these ethnic communities in order to secure jobs for the unskilled labor that was there. More pictures of slums, a drawn picture, photograph. The one thing that gets me is that what people are doing to dry their clothes, you can just see clothes hung up all over the place. And it's to the point where I'm amazed that they're able to keep track of them all. But yes, you can see all these little holes right here where people are coming out from their small living situations to dry out their clothes. And then compare that to a wealthy house. We see a lot of homes like that in this area, right? In urban areas, a lot of these old mansion Victorian style homes you're going to see are remnants of this time period, right? I mean, this is a huge mansion with a beautiful garden. As you can see, there's plenty of space between homes, and I don't see any clothes hanging out outside. Okay, family's going to change, right? You're going to see that the father's going to spend more time away from the home because they're usually the ones that were getting jobs. And the mothers are going to have to assume control of the household affairs. In a lot of cases, what ends up happening is that women will get factory jobs in places like textile mills where they make clothes, and older relatives take care of the children during the day. Now, if you want to know what the exit ticket is, here it is. All right. Working class women are going to marry later and have fewer children because beforehand you had many children to help supply the labor you needed to run the family farm. And then on top of that, there was going to be a really high infant mortality rate, meaning that babies were going to die very, very young. Now, the more children you have on a limited income means the less ability you have to feed them. So women were going to have way less babies now in the city than they did out in the country. There are some positives to this. It definitely did help with children being able to get more individual attention. And in the end, I think it also helped with when public schools started coming out, keeping schools small enough that teachers were able to provide them with a good quality education. But that was far down the road. There's going to be a separate sphere, right? And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's going to really establish and firm up gender roles, right? Thinking that men were supposed to do one specific thing and that women were supposed to do another. And we really don't see this change for about a good, I would say almost 100 years after it starts. The wife is going to be seen as trying to fulfill an obligation to her husband, having children, rearing them. Men were supposed to be the smart, competitive ones that were supposed to be the breadwinners. And then the women were supposed to be motherly, emotional, and dependent on the male. I would say that during the Industrial Revolution, it does strengthen at times, but then also we do see some improvements for women, especially in their ability to get and maintain factory jobs. Unfortunately, the jobs that both men and women are going to be getting in a lot of cases are horrible. But when you talk about equality, in some cases, there were some steps forward there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you get to that exit ticket. We do not have any additional homework today. Remember, you do not have any more reading guides for the rest of the year. Tomorrow's going to be a review, and then Friday is going to be our quiz and our last day of distance learning content. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and we will see you bright and early for some review tomorrow.